Welcome to the May 4th meeting of the Bedminster Township Land Use Board. We'll get started.
Mayor Jacobs?
I am here.
Committeeman Hickey?
Here.
Mr. Travellini?
Here.
Ms. Sorbana? Here. Mr. Leonard?
Here.
Mr. Rodelius?
Here.
Mr. DiGiovanni?
Here.
Mr. Walter?
Here.
Mr. First?
Here.
Ms. Christie? Here. Adequate notice of this meeting of the Bedminster Township Land Use Board was filed with the Township Clerk, sent to the Bernardsville News and the Courier News, and to all subscribers, and posted at the Township Municipal Building, 1 Miller Lane, Bedminster, New Jersey, on January 6, 2023.
All right, stand for the flag salute.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
At this point, we'll open the meeting up to public comments. If anybody has anything that they would like to discuss that is not on our agenda, now would be the time. Is there anybody on Zoom or here anybody?
No one on Zoom.
No one on Zoom. Okay, we'll close that portion of the meeting. In your packets, you have minutes from April 6th. Does anybody have any comments? If not, does anybody want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes from April 6th.
Second.
Second by Rich. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody needs to abstain from that meeting?
Kathleen Stevens?
From April 6th?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so that's those are abstentions, okay. And we also have, does that include, I believe we had executive session minutes from that as well. Tom, do we need to do that?
Yeah, but did you get them?
Yeah,
Okay, yeah, let's do that separately.
okay.
Same thing, you don't.
Yeah, so we have some executive session minutes, so I hear any comments or a motion to approve those.
I'll move to approve.
Second.
Second by George, all in favor?
Aye.
Anybody who needs to abstain from that, the same people?
Again.
Okay. It's Kathy and Steve. Okay. Minutes are approved. Okay. We have the correspondence item from Robin Ray regarding the Township Committee adopting the following ordinance number 2023-02, amending the code ordinance to repeal the flood damage protection. Is there anything we need to discuss on that, or is just an FYI?
You could ask Paul, but you might not want to. Paul's made his.
I'm taking a lot of heat lately.
Paul has made
For the
his
record.
thoughts.
I'm
public.
not speaking at public meetings.
Some people have to tell the truth, all the truth and nothing but the truth. So
Yeah, and that's my problem. That takes the filter off.
And some people have to read those documents, like Paul.
Also have, Gene, I don't know if I have a copy of the second item here, the letter from Frank Pacino regarding the 20 Route 206 LLC being postponed until September 14th of 2023.
Yes, that one has your letterhead.
Gotcha.
Thank
Thank you. Okay, that's it.
the attorney, just letting us know that out in the area is postponed once again to September 14th.
Okay, that's great. All right, so at this point, I'm going to insert an item on here for the signage subcommittee update.
So a couple of months ago, we had a subcommittee created that was a blend of 2 members of the Land Use Board, 2 members of the Historic Preservation Commission, and 2 members of the Township Council to review the sign ordinances in town, to see if we need to make any changes. So we've had 4 meetings. We've spent a lot of time sort of reviewing and clarifying the application process, how a sign gets requested and approved, depending on where it is in town, the enforcement process, what that is, what it looks like, who our sort of repeat offenders are, so that we can make some recommendations. We're currently discussing recommendations related to monument sign, height, area, and potential increases for multi-use sites in certain zones. We're talking about adding language to the ordinance to deal with window stencils. And then 2 other sort of not ordinance related recommendations. we're talking about bringing to the town council. The township committee is a summer intern for the historic preservation committee to help them digitize their records and so that people can find things in them if they have an issue. And how we're gonna manage patrol and enforcement. We have, as we all are aware, during COVID, we made a decision, the town made a decision to sort of suspend some of the signage enforcement. And so there are a fair amount of businesses that are not currently in compliance. And so how do we bring those businesses back into compliance so that people want to abide by whatever changes to the ordinance we make going forward? No point in having the rules if we're not making everybody live by them. So we expect to have hard recommendations, I would say, in the next month or two. Have some scheduling. I don't think we're meeting again until next month, so I'm not sure if we'll have recommendations for the June meeting, but we'll probably have something for the July meeting.
I'd just like to add something there. Anna touched on it.
And the map.
Oh, the map.
And one thing we would like, and I know we've had discussion about it, is a comprehensive map that deals with the zones in town overlaid with the historic preservation districts, because there is not necessarily correlation between the two. Historic preservation cuts sort of across.
Yeah, the historic
across
districts
zones.
don't line up with the zones.
Don't line up with existing
And
zones.
I don't think there was ever an intention for that to occur. I know this is something Robin has talked to me about. I told her I have an intern starting a week from Monday who should be able to work that out.
Perfect. Because I think it's useful for everybody to know sort of where it
Yeah, because the historic district maps we have in the ordinance are old. They're historic.
They're
Historic map.
Since there is this overlap, which district has
The most.
prevails? If there's a
They're
conflict.
both-
They're both different. The
They're independent.
historic district does not create zone standards.
Right.
Doesn't create setbacks.
So that's
doesn't-
just recommendations. So it's-
No, it's a separate regulatory system that is managed by the Historic Preservation Commission.
Zoning does not create aesthetics, HPC does.
All right, I have a sign that's compliant with the zone plan,
Right.
all right? But Historic's
HPC
got a
can
problem.
talk about,
Historic's got a problem with it.
well, if
I
it
don't
meets,
get my sign approved?
well, if it complies with the zoning, it complies with the zoning. HPC, in my opinion, can talk about color and design and that sort of thing, but I don't believe they get their hands on the size or the location. That's dictated by the zone.
If I could just add to that, what I wanted to say is that the process that a store owner has to go through is sometimes confusing, and this is what we think we need to iron this out as best as possible. So there's three places a person wanting a sign can go to: either to the zoning officer, to the land use board directly, and/or to the historic preservation committee directly. And sometimes it gets a little tricky as to whether or not they need a variance or not need a variance, or they're in the historic zone or not in the historic zone, so they don't need to see the historic preservation committee. And we're trying to iron that out as well. And the preliminary way to do that, we're thinking, is every sign application goes through the zoning officer, Susanna, and then she has to kind of
Yeah,
decide
that's exactly where it
goes
should
next.
go. It should go through the zoning officer who will determine if it needs a variance. It would go to the planning board, or if it needs to go to HPC, if it's in one of the
And it
districts.
hasn't always been the last few months.
People have gone different places at different
Yes.
times.
So,
There's probably nothing to prevent you from going to the HPC first. You could do that if you know enough that you have to go there.
well, now that comes up an issue, because the HPC might make recommendations, and then the person thinks that they have an approval on their sign, and then they go ahead and just put a
And
sign.
the HPC should then say, these are our recommendations subject to approval by the zoning officer.
Yeah.
Well, since we have our HPC chair here, do you want to weigh in? Since you're living this process, but you have to get up there and identify yourself.
Don't be so harsh.
Hi, I'm Wendy Hickey. I live at
You can sit
I
down.
can sit? Well, I wanted to stand.
Tom, can you swear her in?
I'm not getting involved in this.
I live at 3 Desiree Court in Bedminster, and I'm also the chairperson of the Historic Preservation Commission. And Paul, the first person who needs your map is our zoning officer, because I agree with Lou and Anna and Sean Blinn and I and Susanna have been working very closely together. There was a lot of exploration, a lot of going back and forth, because we come from so many different perspectives. We put Lou through the ringer, so he has
Good.
a big familiarity with the HPC. Anna helped us get our thoughts organized. She questions everything, and I play devil's advocate. Sean has a breadth of experience. He wrote some of the approach that's in our current sign ordinance, plus he used to be a member of the planning board. So it's a knowledgeable group, and we've been exploring a lot of things. I didn't mean the long preamble, but Susanna needs that map. That map doesn't exist. So what she doesn't know, she doesn't really know when people come to her if they're in an historic village.
Well, she does now, because she has a spreadsheet of all the lots and blocks that are in the
Okay, so she has
historic
the
district.
spreadsheet.
She has
Fine,
that.
that's good.
And
That's
that was
helpful.
the
That's helpful.
interim solution before
Thanks.
the map was done. I sat down there and wrote down all the properties that are in the districts.
Okay, great. And then it overlaps with a village neighborhood. Well, not village, with a neighborhood zone. I think that's what they call it. It
Yeah.
overlaps with neighborhood zones. And there are 4 historic villages. They have multiple neighborhood zones within the historic village. And so the mesh is interesting, because we're there to explore the sign ordinance. There's one sign ordinance, then each village has sign ordinance addendums, and each is slightly different. So the composite of the entire sign ordinance varies by neighborhood. It varies by zone, because you have to look at both. And then if you add to that the historic preservation ordinance language, that's very interesting, because in the historic villages, there is some leeway granted to the HPC to consider whether or not the sign proposed meets the character of the neighborhood. We have a great recent example, and I don't think that the property owner would mind that I say this. The liquor store, Colonial Liquors, changed owners, and the new owner took the 2 wooden signs on the building, used the same font and the same historic colors, but changed it to something like Colonial Fine Wines and Spirits. And we recommended, although a variance could have been required, we recommended that those 2 signs be grandfathered. And we wrote that in the certificate of appropriateness. And we believed that we had that leeway.
I don't think you do. You don't have the authority to grant a variance or
No,
make
I
that
didn't know.
determination.
We recommended that these
But the zoning officer can't do that either. The zoning officer can't give a
That
variance.
is true. We knew all of that. We recommended that a variance be granted. We recommended that those 2 signs be grandfathered because they were consistent with the authentic character of that building and that neighborhood, and that they had been there for decades before any of us served on any boards in the town. And we wrote right in the certificate of appropriateness that we recommended that they be granted a variance because we recommended that these 2 signs be grandfathered.
But
Now,
it-
that piece
Wendy-
of paper should have come to you guys.
But Wendy, if the sign is there and all they're doing is changing the text on the sign,
Yes.
no variance is required ever. You can re-letter a sign.
It may
You can
not,
change
But we
what it
don't
says.
know, we have no record, because we need an intern to digitize our records. We have no record where there was nothing we could call up and say that those signs were ever approved in the first place. All we know is that those signs were there.
You have pictures of it?
We don't know if they were approved.
if they're there, unless there's some reason to think that they're done without permission, it's sort of the same thing you're saying, that basically, especially if it's as old as you think they are.
I think they're old.
They may predate.
That's the extent
they
of my
may
knowledge.
Theoretically, they may predate zoning, but I guess the way I look at it is, if there's an existing sign, there's no zoning violation, that sign is out of order or non-compliant, changing the message of a sign, okay, just changing the words on an existing sign is nothing. It may be a sign permit.
But if you take it at face value, and if you read the ordinance and you look at the sign, they don't match.
It's a pre-existing non-conforming condition,
Yeah, like,
and you can
the
maintain.
board is a
I
board.
believe that. I believe that you're correct.
And that's
But
why
I really don't know what happened or what the situation was when the sign was originally put up.
So, wait a second. So it seems to me that the Historic Commission, if they would have said, subject to complying with zoning laws as opposed to subject to getting a variance, nobody would have a complaint with what they did.
I'm not sure anybody has a
I
complaint.
don't know if anybody had a complaint with
Well,
what they
you're saying
did.
it wasn't the right process, and I'm just saying.
I don't know what the process
I
was.
don't think they needed to go beyond the zoning officer. I believe we did the right process.
Right, but
Yeah.
what I'm saying, Wendy, is if there's an existing sign there and it's 30 square feet, and it's been there since before the zone changed, 25 years ago or so, okay? If it's been there and it's too big, it doesn't comply with the ordinance, it's a pre-existing non-conforming condition, you can change the letters on it, you can change the message on it, and it doesn't need a variance.
But Paul, how do they
Okay, well, we
establish
don't
that?
grant variances
How do
anytime, so.
How do they
for me,
know it's a
it's-
pre-existing non-conforming condition?
We didn't know any of that.
Sometimes they know.
They don't know.
Well, that's not necessarily HPC's job.
That's the
It's not.
point,
But it
Paul.
was our job to review the sign.
Yes, to review the
Because
sign.
we explored this. So there are instances, there's another sign that wanted to come before us, and I'm not going to name this one. It would be a brand new sign, a brand new monument sign. We knew, based on the sign ordinance, that this brand new monument sign would require a variance. We knew that. And so we didn't agree to see the applicant for the first few months. And, but then we talked about it, and I actually talked about it in the subcommittee with Lou and Anna and Sean. And there was some talk about, well, if they need a variance, they should bypass the HPC and then come to zoning. And then there was further talk that said, no, they still shouldn't bypass the HPC. They should go to the HPC and ask for conditional approval. Do you approve the sign if they were to get a variance? And we didn't even like the sign at all. So we would never have approved that sign. But we thought then maybe we should take that step. Maybe we should take that step. And there are people who believe that for the aesthetics of the sign, that we should always have them come to us
Well,
first.
an applicant can't come for a variance until they've been through the HPC.
It's one of the
That's a completeness requirement.
Completeness item of the
Well,
variance.
that's
the
why,
dilemma, Because
if,
that's not been clear for the last year or two.
Well, it should be, it's been on the checklist for 25 years.
I understand, Paul, and I know that to be true, but the Historic Commission people weren't aware of that. The zoning officer wasn't really even aware of that. And there was a lot of, you can see the dilemma here. There's a lot
Right,
of
well,
stuff going in different directions.
we knew
And
that
that's
that
what we're
sign,
trying to
that
work
sign
on.
would have been the third monument sign on a
that's-
property in a zone that only allows one monument sign.
Let's just talk about that to begin with. The minute that somebody's putting up a new monument or a new
Right,
board sign, that's a site plan application. You can't just go willy-nilly, start putting up signs.
Correct,
You need to
right.
say where your sign is, and that's a planning board, land use board application. They obviously didn't even make that application, but they need to. And they need to get a if you're right about the size or about the third monument, they need that variance as well. But every applicant who comes here that's in a historic preservation district, at some point needs to go to the Historic Preservation Commission and get a vote
and that point is before they come here.
and usually
It
it's
is
before they come
before,
here.
it is before,
You could
right.
do it conditionally. In fact, even when you approve it, it is conditional.
it's always conditional, that's
There's
true.
nothing that is,
Right.
that you don't let them build, your approval doesn't give them the permission to build something, especially if it's a site plan change. But it does create a step, though, and that step is something we try to follow. We try to read what the Historic Preservation Commission says about the approval or the, whatever you write. And that would be considered by the board in determining whether to grant the approval of either site plan, even without a variance, or a site plan with a variance. Now, the zoning off, if it's truly like just a sign, and it's a new sign, that sometimes though, on a facade of a building, that might be just a sign permit from the zoning officer. And if it's in the Historic Preservation Commission, it needs the Historic Preservation Commission approval too. And these are not that complex. I appreciate that everybody that's doing it, it's new to them, but they need to get advice. And it is.
Well, this conversation kind of mirrors the conversations we've had in the subcommittee, and I don't mean to rehash the same meetings that we've already been having, but we did spend a lot of time talking about anomalies. So, which I think was a healthy thing to do, because we needed to get grounded in what is working, what's not working, what is known, what isn't known. And this particular example that I brought up begged another question. The other question was, should the building owner come to us, or should the tenant come to us? So this monument sign is on a property that already has 2 monument signs, so we had Susanna bring the plans to us. The site plans only allow 1 monument sign, and 2 were there. And Susanna said to us, well, we really don't know if the second monument sign was approved, because post the site plan, the file grew to be this big. And the reason she measured it with her hands is because it's a paper file. And so we had the site plans, but we still didn't have the answer as to whether or not there was ever permission for the second monument sign. We didn't have any knowledge of any variances granted for that site for additional signage. And so now we're faced with this third monument sign, but it was the tenant who wanted to be the applicant, not the homeowner, not the property owner. So that was another problem that came up with this one, because we didn't even know if we should entertain a discussion with the tenant.
Isn't there a
When it
process
was
where you have to
monument
have
sign.
the
Pardon me?
owner's approval for the tenant to come?
There is, whenever it comes to the land use board, there's a requirement that you have the owner consent. I don't know if we have to think back to this, because we don't run into this very often, where a tenant comes in, basically rogue, and asks for an approval that the owner doesn't know
We
about.
run into it all
My
the
tenant
time.
comes to me all the time.
You're getting it all the time as well,
Yeah,
right?
we get it all the time. We get the tenants and not the property owners.
Well, that doesn't mean the property owner doesn't know about it. And perhaps what we have to do, and I was speaking to Robin about this earlier today, is we have to relook at some of our application forms. And maybe it's as simple as taking the HPC application form and have a line for the owner's consent.
You are correct, and that is definitely I think we're all in agreement on that.
And also,
that-
if a tenant comes in and it's to put some monument on land that they're not the tenant for, they're the tenant for the space in the building, presumably. Tenants are usually just leasing the inside walls and the door and the signage on the building. They are not the tenant of the land. So they really automatically have no authority to be saying they want to put up a monument
A
sign.
monument sign.
It's just like,
But they could have the
matter of
owner's
law.
approval.
they could, but that would be in writing, and that's a good question to ask.
Right.
You're coming here to say that you want to have this monument sign, third monument sign on the landlord's property. Where's the landlord? Did he approve this? And it's their duty to tell you that they have the authority to do it, and to give you a copy of the resolution that authorized the second monument sign. So you're thinking, we don't have any record. Well, they probably don't have any record. And it wasn't the Historic Preservation's duty to find that out. It was the applicant's duty to say, all these signs are permitted. Here's the resolutions, here's the permits. I want a third one. They messed one thing up. They don't have there's no authority to just.
But Tom,
Put
is
up a
that
third sign.
HPC's responsibility? If they're
No.
supposed to look at and approve signs, the number of signs, 5 signs, 4 signs, 3 signs, 2 signs, 1 sign.
That is the zoning ordinance, and so Wendy has picked it up, but she's saying it's an anomaly. In other words, here's an applicant suddenly coming to them, and they don't even have proof that they have permission for 2 monument signs. It's obviously a
But I'll
problem.
come back to that.
It shouldn't be,
That should not be HPC's
they shouldn't have
responsibility
even filed.
about whether the property owner,
We have a bit of a responsibility.
Yeah,
Just
people come to them,
warn
they're
them.
trying to coordinate.
people
warn
come to
them.
them,
I
but
wanna warn them.
ultimate decisions are either from the planning board, the zoning board, or the zoning officer.
Yeah, and the first blush is the zoning officer, even for signs, but, you know, she's trying to coordinate with you and the Historic Preservation Commission. And you want to be cooperative. And I'm just saying that Paul is right, that basically the landlord, if we have to look at the application form, make sure the landlord signs for authority to come to the HPC on that if there is an application form, let's do that. Because they really shouldn't even be asking to change the sign on a building if they don't have the landlord's authority.
But here, I actually do want to come back to that example. So if the Colonial Liquors, since they came before you and we're going to change the hypothetical, which is they didn't use the historic colors or the historic lettering, and they were using some bright, bold font in neon green and neon yellow and neon blue. And they were going to, but using the same sign, changing the lettering, changing the font, and changing the colors to something that would not be appropriate for the historic district. Would that still be something that, Paul, you would say is not within their jurisdiction?
It is a permitted sign, but it must get a certificate of appropriateness from the HPC.
Must.
It must.
If it's in the Historic Preservation.
I think what you misunderstood me, because you can redo the messaging on the sign, generally speaking, anywhere, anytime. But if it's in the historic district, the Historic Preservation Commission has the ability to say, it can't look like a pink shirt with a green lanyard, you know?
It was all on purpose.
Is this an inside joke?
Yes.
Can you really describe your real thoughts on the flood hazard rules?
No, but seriously, it's, the zoning officer looks at it to see, okay, it's the same size as it was before. So from a zoning perspective, it is permitted, but to get the sign permit, it has to pass zoning and it has to pass HPC.
So we did the right thing.
Yes, you did. And
you did the right
your
thing.
characterization.
Paul, can you help me out? Because I really don't understand what we're talking about. My general understanding is the Historical Commission would look to see the appropriateness of a sign. Whether the sign, the character of the sign, the character of the letters, the color, the design fits within the historical footprint of the area. And that analysis has nothing to do with zoning, has nothing to do with grandfathering, has nothing to do with size. It just has to do with appropriateness. Is that wrong?
In my opinion, that is correct.
Okay.
Now if the HPC wants to say, okay, they're coming in for a third monument sign, you know, one of our questions for the zoning officer is, are they authorized those?
I'd just like to finish.
Okay, sorry.
So I don't understand why it is that the Historical Commission can't, if somebody brings a sign to them, whether it's in order or not in order, and that's a separate issue, the timing. But let's just say that they went there first. Whatever they approve would be subject to compliance with the zoning laws.
Correct.
The zoning laws include the size of the sign, the location of the sign, the site plan, the grandfathering, and everything else.
Illumination, not illumination.
I still believe, though, the HPC needs to be responsible. We need to be very knowledgeable about the sign ordinance, and we need to help make certain with this subcommittee that the sign ordinance works for our town and works for our historic villages. And I do believe that we have a responsibility to tell folks, we're not going to recommend any variances for this, that the sign is too large, you want to ignore the step. I think that we need to warn them that it would require a variance and that there are already problems on the property.
I understand that you want to be helpful to people, but it invariably, unless you have the same professionals at your meeting, and I don't know whether you do or you don't, you're just potentially making problems for everybody. If you stick to the charter and then you make it absolutely clear that you're not passing on any zoning issues and that they need to go to the zoning officer and ensure that it complies, nothing bad can happen.
Well, I believe that we do make that clear, and I believe that the rules that we're discussing say that all signs need to go to the zoning officer first. The zoning officer should look and say, oh, you have to go to the HPC. That is a reasonable sequence of events.
But just because you're in the, sorry to interrupt you, Wendy, but just because you're in the zone, you have to go to HPC. All the other criteria, size, lights,
It's
what
a
have
historic
you,
village.
is all something for the zone. The zoning board or the planning board, whomever prevails here.
Or the
So
zoning officer.
if I'm listening to Steve's point, your lane
Right.
is the appropriateness with respect to whatever historical standards or character or,
Yes.
whatever those cues are to make it consistent with what historic is deciding about. But again, you can't decide if a second one is appropriate or not appropriate. 'Cause
Okay, I'll give you
appropriate
another-
I think is your
Right, I'll give you
is your
another
thing.
example.
But numbers and size and things like that, you have no
I'll give
comment.
you
You gotta go
another
to zoning
example.
first and then come back to us if you're looking for all this other stuff.
I'll give
Because
you-
they're gonna come with an acceptance from you and say, well, I got this approved by, that would be the worst case scenario. I got this approved by historical and now you're telling me I can't build it?
I'll give you another example.
Well, how about a footnote, Wendy?
Pardon me?
Every single certificate of appropriateness can have a footnote or a condition
Right,
that this requires zoning officer or board approval. In other words,
Sure.
you're not
that's,
judging that. And I think people know that.
we have never represented anything but
That's
that.
right, that's right. And
Right.
you are the Historic Preservation
Right.
Committee. So, and there is an ordinance and there is a map. I think there's a map somewhere. There better be a map somewhere.
There is a map, you can't read it very well.
Historical maybe. So,
Wendy, you were going to give another hypothetical?
Yeah, somebody, I think, kind of played fast and loose with the zoning officer. An applicant came to us, and when they bring us their renderings have dimensions, okay? And they're familiar with the sign ordinance, we're familiar with the sign ordinance. This business came to us, we iterated on the sign. We do have historic colors, okay? We iterated on the sign, the font, the logo, et cetera. We approved a sign, and it was a professional rendering. Months went by, and apparently the sign company changed. It was a copyrighted design, and the person built a huge sign and never went to the zoning board. It didn't build in the setback, and it doesn't look anything like the design that was approved, but there was correspondence with the zoning officer. The correspondence said, yeah, HPC approved, and then I had to change sign companies, and this is similar, and this is what we're gonna build.
Well,
And
that's,
they buffaloed the zoning officer, and they built it.
and that's a case where the zoning officer should kick it back to the HPC.
Which one?
I don't think she knew to do that. And the applicant sent her this letter. I think it was a little manipulative. It was kind of,
People try to get by on the zoning officer.
well, they succeeded.
Yeah, I know.
They succeeded.
It's an incredibly non-compliant situation.
Well, Wendy, when they came to you and you approved this application, I mean, wasn't there any record of, like the drawings that?
I think it's in the paper file.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, it's like the zoning officer will go back
and that's
to
what they're
that.
limited to, and that's what your certificate is for. That sign, that was given to you, and you've done your task. And if that is what happened, it sounds like a zoning violation, and that should be dealt with by the zoning officer, not this board. So we don't want to know who it is.
Yeah,
but-
actually, I should end this, but we did,
Right.
we made some, we're going to change the application, but we're also going to take the renderings now, and we're going to make sure that they're stapled
Yes.
to the certificate of authorization,
Good.
and we're going to make sure we stamp them, the renderings, but then I don't really know that they all come here, and that's actually why Kathy is on both commissions, because we we
Yeah.
were experiencing where all of our certificates of appropriateness weren't making it to you guys.
Well, not all of them will. Many of them won't.
Some things
Many of
don't
the ones you
require a
issue never
board
have to come to
action.
this board.
Well, I would think they wouldn't have
Because
to
the
come
zoning
here
officer
if they
approves
hit the zone.
Because it's something that doesn't require site plan approval.
Right.
or
And,
variance.
and we don't want to make it such that the zoning officer is petrified to authorize something and force everything to come here. So either she needs or he needs to be trained and given some latitude to make decisions, and then that person is the enforcement person. Am I correct, guys? If someone builds something.
That's the enforcement, right. And we don't want to be too punitive on the business owners, so we don't
No,
want the
but
business owners
but you want to
be
give that
scared.
zoning officer some latitude
Yeah.
to make decisions so that every stinking sign doesn't come here and waste people's time, money, and.
Rich, there really is no latitude.
No,
The ordinance is the
that's-
ordinance. If it
exactly,
complies with
that's
the
not
ordinance, it
right.
does. If it doesn't comply with the ordinance, it comes.
Well,
It comes here.
But
No,
there seems to be some concern that somebody's approving something that they weren't necessarily in agreement with.
Then
Bill, that was, and I think that's Wendy's point, is that there.
It shouldn't have
That's
happened.
no, right?
It should not have happened.
But you're,
Send me
but
the
I'll
information on what that
disagree
is
with
and I'll
you,
figure out
and
what's going on.
I'll agree with the guy in,
Whatever, he's an engineer.
he's an engineer.
Anyway,
The guy just dressed like an
No,
engineer.
He doesn't have a thing in his pocket.
Yeah, he
I'm
doesn't
sorry
have
that this
a vote. I
conversation.
can see that.
No, this is very helpful.
Thank you.
But the zoning officer should not have latitude. It's the latitude is set up in the ordinance,
Yeah.
right? So if our ordinance is too strict, which is really the main thing that was tasked to the subcommittee, and by the way, not enforcement, but to look at the sign ordinance and see if it's too lax or too strict, or where it could be tweaked.
Yeah, if the ordinance says that 8 square feet is permitted,
Then
the
that's.
zoning
Well,
officer
and
can't.
when I say
permit
latitude, I'm
8.1.
not saying, oh, she's got the latitude to
arbitrary.
make it 10 feet instead of 8, but she ought to feel comfortable that
Right.
it's
Her
something
job-
that's consistent with what they've approved. Now they're gonna go build what they've approved without it coming to the zoning board. And then when it's built, and it doesn't look like what was approved,
Then that's an enforcement issue.
then it becomes an
That's
One
enforcement
thing
issue.
I do want to mention, the HPC doesn't get involved in temporary signs, but our subcommittee is talking about the language of the sign ordinance. So we will talk about temporary signs at our subcommittee because we are considering the language of the sign ordinance.
Temporary signs are very, very problematic. Please come up with something that works.
Right.
Because I
That's why we hope you can solve it all.
So, Wendy, if someone came to HPC with a 8x10 sign,
Mhm.
but that 8x10 sign was 250 years old, was folk art, someone picked it up at an antique store, and
That's cool.
it's going to be, it's awesome, right? It's going to be
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
And it could be, libations or something like that.
So this is interesting.
Your
Let's say
authority, just as we discussed, your authority would not be, geez, it's too big, we're going to reject it. Your authority should be appropriateness.
True. So we could, in essence, love it, and we could recommend that, that it be approved by you guys. And then you guys, it's interesting, because from what I've heard from Lou and Anna, variances cost a lot of money. Unless you just, So, I don't know. So I could say something, I could say it's authentic, it is suitable for the character of the neighborhood. We know it doesn't comply at all with this sign ordinance, but we are in favor of this. And we recommend that you seriously consider permitting this, whatever, because we're an advisory board. You guys, I don't know. Would you make them get their lawyers and?
But
Well,
Larry's point
there's
is-
a couple of non-negotiable things. If the applicant is not an individual, they must come with an attorney. That is the law.
Oh.
There is no, if it's somebody LLC, they can't come up here and talk.
To here or to HPC?
To hear.
Okay,
No, because we can't approve it.
Right.
We can approve.
you
it.
can give
The
recommendations.
aesthetic and the character.
And that's why it gets expensive, because lawyers cost so much money. They're the problem.
So if they buy it at.
Hey, I know how much site plans cost, and they're a lot more.
Larry, they didn't save any money
Is there any,
at the flea market
so,
because of the lawyers.
So is there any way to,
Wait, hold- I'm sorry, but George was going to say he agrees with these, so I'd like to hear that.
All I'm saying is that you're not there to talk about size, but yet. Well,
We are.
Well, but
We talk a
wait,
little about
but that's the dilemma.
You're right.
Because you're not. You're there to say, okay, this fits in the character of Pluckerman, okay? It's not to say, well, it fits in the character, but it's 2 feet too big. That's not your job.
Yeah, no, George, I would.
Wait, let me
I'm
just
sorry.
finish.
Go ahead.
Warn them.
Wait.
Warn them.
You certainly, they need to understand that if they're going for a variance, that's got nothing to do with you,
True,
only the appropriateness.
true, true.
And, so what do you do first? You come here for a variance first?
No.
You go there.
Yeah.
But but your dilemma is, well, no, we can't approve it because it's too big. But what Larry is saying, no, that's not your job. Your job is to say it's appropriate and that's it.
Now, George, I will tell you what I think is kind of an exception to that, and this is where all the lines are gray. Nothing is black and white. If somebody comes into the HPC and they want to take the Markel paper sign from Patterson and put it on top of a building in Pluckerman, I think it's okay for the HPC to say, no, that large roof mounted sign is not appropriate in the district.
Right, the size.
Even though they recognize, it might be beautiful looking, but it's just way too big.
Right.
Well, okay,
I think
but again,
you have the authority to do
That's
that.
true, we would recommend that, but Larry was also trying to say, what if we liked it? So
Yeah.
you're right.
Right, that's a different thing.
We could like it,
That's a
we
different
could-
thing, and your recommendation is read here, and I'll just help you know, it matters a lot, because sometimes your recommendation it's not understandable here. Like, there was something about I forget, a gazebo on somebody's front.
Oh, I totally remember that one.
And it was so, yeah, okay, well, they wanted that, and then we're
Well,
dealing
you-
with that.
but my
But the fact
recollection-
that you said something meant this board could ask, why did that come up? Paul then went and talked to the HBC, or maybe Colin, tried to figure out and integrate this issue about something in the front yard, which was desirable with what is acceptable on this site for the site plan, and I think it was worked out adequately, I hope, but that coordination, okay, not to your satisfaction, but the board gets to decide that. And that's why coordination is really good, and Wendy, what you're talking about, and very good that you're talking about with the subcommittee, because all of these things, they're a little amorphous, and there's no easy way to help somebody through this process. You actually have to go talk about and show and get appropriateness from you, get a variance from this board, or if it's not a site plan or variance, a zoning permit. And that's just the law.
Right,
And it
and that
doesn't really
situation-
matter, you can't really help them
Right.
comply other than steer them in the right direction.
Tom,
In
can
that
somebody-
situation, we were disappointed,
I
because
appreciate
the information didn't come here. It was my impression that the land use board asked the applicant why, and this was a year and a half or 2 years later, why the, wasn't a lot, what's the other word for
Gazebo.
lana? It wasn't a gazebo.
Pergola.
Something.
Pergola.
Why the pergola? Why the
Pergola.
pergola? Why the pergola? And that whoever was there that night had never been to the HPC, and that applicant's representative said, I don't know.
Yeah.
And the paperwork hadn't come here. There was a reason. They were taking down an historic building, which was too small to be commercially viable, and it was decrepit. They were taking it down, and they were putting up a parking lot. And this is on Main Street. We did not want to be the commission that said, oh yeah, turn Main Street into asphalt parking lots. We didn't want to put up a parking lot on Main Street. We wanted something to mask the additional cars. And that never got translated to what this board reviewed. And that was a real disappointment. And that's another thing, years later, it ended up with Kathy being on both. Right.
What is the process now?
Sorry, I was just gonna say though, but again, if the application is rewritten and it asks more of these questions, and when it's approved, more of these things are written down. And again, I'm gonna just
I
speak
don't
from
think that's-
one point of view that none of you can relate to, is that in the office, Susanna's probably only in maybe 1 or 2 hours, working hours. Paul's in a couple of hours. So when these people first come in, they're greeted by me or Robin or somebody who taxes has no idea. And that is why what takes place has got to be A, B, C. Because
On the form.
everybody here already has other
On the
jobs.
form,
They
right.
need a finance person, and they come in and they're like, well, yeah, I might need a sign, let me get that for you, and it gets very convoluted, so it's not to even educate everybody that's here, you guys get it. It's the fact that the people in the office are the ones that are handing it out, and none of us know
Oh, you're right. The
which
form-
direction it's
We have
supposed to
to
go.
improve the form. I just don't think the form ever.
Yeah, you got it. Back to the microphone.
Yeah.
I just don't think the form ever made it here, but thanks. I'm so sorry to take up all this time.
But just circling back, you're gonna make some recommendations in terms of process. You're gonna make some recommendations, because my assumption is people are breaking rules or are not aware of the rules. And you're observing that because you're the cow catcher on the process. You're right up front. You're the first people some of these people see. So you're gonna make some recommendations like, hey, you know what? We're hearing that the 2x2 sign isn't big enough. You might want to consider a larger sign. I don't know, whatever it might be.
I'm
There's
still
gonna be.
stuck on the word cowcatcher.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. Good luck tonight, Colin.
It's everything. You're the front end of the process.
And Colin, that goes back to what I said initially.
Right.
We need a process, we need a step-by-step, Janine is 100% correct. We need a policy and procedure on how this goes forward, and we need to then educate the people, specifically, in my mind, the zoning officer, about being a gatekeeper and directing these things in the right way.
And then I'm assuming, based on your professional judgment, you're seeing things where the process is not working, things are broken, or the applicant is trying to do something outside of the current zoning regulations. You may make recommendations in terms of how we may want to look at the sign ordinance differently or change something.
And we've had signs here that never went, that we were asked to approve on the land use board that never went to the historic commission.
Right.
And Peapack Gladstone Bank's a perfect example of that.
But they're not in the historic district, so like, you know.
Yeah,
So-
so I would never
so-
go there.
Yeah, right. So if they're done in the historic district, they don't
They don't
go to it.
I understand that, but the idea is that some of these people don't know who to go to and when to
Okay,
go.
okay, so let's
We need
use
a
an
policy.
example, and I believe, right, a purple sign in Pluckerman,
Yes.
Okay.
right? That you guys had comments, and was that,
It was a fuchsia sign, rigid.
was it?
It was remedied.
Purple
Right.
is Victorian
Right.
color, by the
Right.
way.
So that was an
Not
example
historic.
It's great.
It's a Victorian color,
of it working, right?
Yes, it did work.
Yes.
just saying.
Thank you.
So that's what we're working on.
Maybe the application form.
Can I ask a question about what else you might be working on?
Because
Because this is my pet signage peeve.
Yes.
Big property, small
Solve a lot
property,
of
any discussion about scalability of these signs?
Yes, in fact, Anna has made some suggestions already about changing the size of the signs.
I mean, if you own a 400,000 square foot building on a 20-acre site,
You get a
you're-
smaller sign.
you get a smaller sign, right? Or you get the same stupid sign that they have in the 20,000 square foot strip mall.
Well,
We're talking about
we're,
something.
we're talking about something. There may be some.
Again, God forbid you had a successful business in Bedminster.
The sign isn't gonna do
That
it,
sign
right?
depends.
Yeah, if it's successful, everybody knows
Anytime
what
you
it
have a
is.
huge sign, it might-
It may help. It may help.
The
It may
different
help.
perspectives and viewpoints on the subcommittee are really good. They're
Because
working.
tenants want signage.
And we are making the signs bigger because of Anna. Okay?
Uh-oh.
So-
Oh.
We're gonna blame Anna.
Go, girl.
We're recommending the township committee make them bigger.
Right. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Carol, can I hand you the reins?
Oh, she's here?
Yeah.
Yay.
Only if she unmutes.
You're on mute, hon.
You know, Frank's been talking for about like an hour now, but he's been on mute.
Hey, Carol.
Go ahead, Jeff, finish up. Yeah.
Okay. So we are on item number 6. Do you have your agenda in front of you, Carol? No? I guess I'm gonna shoot it on the back.
We have an application submitted for the Lamington General Store that had a very specific use variance approval. The proposal coming in is to create to expand that use approval to more uses, basically. And that's really what the application is all about. No specifically defined use at this point. A couple of excluded uses, but that'll be part of the application. There's a couple of items in my May 1st letter for which waivers are recommended. And subject to that, I would say that the application can be deemed complete and scheduled for hearing.
Is this a structure? Are they proposing a new structure?
No,
or
it's
just
to use
just
the
a use?
existing building. There's no site improvements proposed.
So if the board is ready, it's a motion to waive the remaining items for completeness and deem the application complete, subject to Paul's letter.
I'll make the motion.
Second.
Roll call on that.
Yes, a roll call.
Mayor Jacobs?
Aye.
Committeeman Higgy?
Aye.
Mr. Cavallini?
Aye.
Mr. O'Brien?
Aye.
Mr. Leonard?
Aye.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Aye.
Mr. DeGenini?
Aye.
Mr. Walter?
Aye.
Mr. First?
Aye.
Mr. Christie? Aye. Chairwoman Betcha.
And I think you take Larry and Colin off because it's a use variance.
Right, because I was wondering that.
Aye.
It is a D?
Yeah, it is a D.
It is, I'm so sorry I knew that.
Oh, I thought it was identified as a C.
No.
And it's a deal.
Okay. Real quick, can I just ask, I know we just approved it, but probably should look, why, what's a partial waiver of the feature within 200 feet? You know, usually you have to notify everyone within.
We have to notify them, but it's a matter of showing it on the maps.
Oh, so this also not an objection to the partial waiver? Oh,
Yeah,
that
they show stuff close to the property, but they don't show everything 200 feet.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
A regular survey doesn't show much beyond your property line, but when you come here, the site plan subdivision says, tell us within 200 feet of the property line. It's an enhanced survey and it's a little expensive, so people ask for waivers of that. Sometimes.
All right. That one passed. We can move right into our old business, continued discussion of the master plan and the annual report.
Can we set a date for that?
Oh, do we have to set a date for that next?
I already reached out to them and told them that, you know, June, anything's, we're open, so they're gonna let me know as soon as they have their witnesses to what they want. So hopefully they'll either be, I think it's June 1st or 8th.
Okay.
But I will let you guys know as soon as I can.
Pretty open schedule right now. There's a lot on it.
We did just get another application in, but it still has to be reviewed, but yes.
Gotcha.
We did.
Okay. All right, that's when we find that out. Okay. With that said, then we can move on to the master plan discussion.
And if you recall at the last meeting, Frank and I were going to be playing with numbers, which we did on a series of email exchanges, and my memo dated May 3rd kind of gives you a breakdown. And there are some things that I want to explain about this chart a little bit. First thing, the objective was to come up with lot coverage standards for all single-family residential uses across all the zones. This way you don't get the R3 zone having a very odd comparison to the same size lot in the R10 zone. So this is just based on lot size only, not the zone district. It is a little bit skewed that way because of the gradation of the lots. For example, less than a half an acre, you get a 30% lot coverage. Now, what I've done with this chart is, if you read it, I'm talking about base coverage, minimum, maximum, and that sort of thing. And that is really intended to take out the jumps or actually the jump down that you normally get in a zone table, where if you have 1.9 acres, you get a lot more coverage than a 2.1 acre lot, and the lots are not that different. So what the base coverage is, that column, and this is not the way it's going to end up in a zoning ordinance. The base coverage is how much you start with. And then you look at the incremental coverage above that. For example, let's go to the 1 to 2 acre line. Okay, you can see that your base coverage is 11,979 square feet. That means you got 30% of your first half acre, 25% of your second half acre, and then you get 20% of the acre between 1 and 2 acres. So that would give you, you would start with the 11,979, and then they get 20% of the next acre, which gives you a maximum in that zone of 20,961, which then moves up to the next line for the 2 to 3 acres. And I think that smooths the curve out.
This is like a tax table.
It is.
So
Exactly.
Is it fair to say that where it says less than half to 1, so your first half acre, you get 30%, your next half acre, you get 25%, your somewhere, your 1.5, so that 0.5 gets 20%.
That's correct.
So maybe because I'm a lawyer, I might put some words in to that effect, explaining how that increment adds up, such as your first, then your next, then you're up to.
And that would be the intent. And like Rich says, this is a tax table.
Tom,
No, I like
Stephen, there's nothing, no brotherhood here against the engineer.
No, I think it's relatively simple to write.
Yeah, and like I said, this is not the way it goes in a zoning ordinance. There have to be words that explain this a little more, but I'm here. Now, but one thing I did want to make everybody aware of, and that's the last column. And I think that's important, because this really boils down to what ends up being a weighted average. Because I think at the last meeting, everybody said, 10% coverage is good for a 7 to 10 acre lot. But under this standard, that lot actually gets 14.4% coverage, because these other lots bulk you up as you go forward. So, at the risk of, blowing my mind with arithmetic, you can adjust any of these things.
Right, I was going to say, at that point, it's numbers, but this addresses.
This addresses it doesn't go up like that, it just goes, and it.
Now it becomes a matter of making the numbers make sense.
And what I would say is, look at the last column.
Yeah, are you
And
satisfied?
does that make sense to you? If it doesn't make sense to you, if 14.4% for a 10 acre lot is too much, when you were talking about 7.5%.
Right.
Then let me know, and, it will take some.
So, are there examples that you can point out, either that we've approved, or just, frankly, here's an aerial of a 10 acre site with 14.5% impervious?
I don't know that I can do that. But I can tell you that 14.4% on a 10 acre lot is
That's a lot.
is a lot on the lot.
Well, we're at 5 now, right?
Right.
What if
And
you-
we're going to,
Paul, what if you put a cap that it can't be any greater? So if you're in the 1.5 to 1, okay, then that percentage of coverage at the max can't be any greater than the 30% in the category below. And as you go up this thing, for example, 2 to 3 is the first one that exceeds the standard at 1 to 2. So if you cap the 2.8, the 20.8 at 20%, and you cap the 17.9 at 13.5%, and you cap the 16.2 at 12. No, wait a minute, is that right?
I don't think, Rich,
17 capped at 15.
yeah,
13.5, 16.2 capped at 13.5, and so forth, because, this accretive scenario that you've created actually exacerbates this problem.
it's a weighted average
Yeah,
of what the coverage is. And so that's going to always roll it up.
and now these people, and that's 50% more than what the, at the top,
Those numbers.
So now we want to
that's almost
take
50% greater.
the-
It takes,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah, right now, under this, an 8 acre lot would be, or a 10 acre lot would be permitted 3 times what is permitted now.
Right, so these are numbers that, if we go to your second column, the percent coverage, I think at this point the structure is right. Now I got to get the numbers to make sense. So
Larry, Paul said before, if you look at the last column,
one,
that's the one that is really the effective impacted this. So if you smooth those numbers down to where you want them, in other words, if you don't want 14.4 when you get to 10 acres, put the number you want in there and then work backwards to get down
Yeah,
to.
it's working it back down. For example, if we wanted the 1.5 or half acre to 1 acre to be a maximum of 25% coverage, okay? That means the permitted coverage from a half acre to 1 acre is going to be 20%.
Right.
Right.
And the same kind of arithmetic works its way up the table.
Right.
And I will ask this question to you. Is the second column, does that look good to you? If the second column looks good, I can adjust it so the third column becomes the second column and the second column changes.
Second column, you mean percent coverage?
Yeah, if the second column were the last column, would you be happy?
Yeah, because it's 7.5, that's what we
See,
have.
Because then I can change the second column and make the last column.
Yeah, exactly. You got it.
The second column, maybe everybody sees it, but the second column should be labeled the increase in the delta.
Yeah, and
It's
that's
not the increase, it's the increase of the delta.
and that's what has to be the explanation to this
Right.
chart. And I just wanted to get the numbers in here because I didn't know what they were going to come out to be. So that's, and if the board is happy with me making it so the last column is consistent with what the second column shows, I can work my way backwards.
How much, I know we're familiar with a 10 acre plus going from 5 to 7.5, because we talked about that a lot. How's the 3 to 5 or the 2 to 3? Has that changed a lot in percentage of coverage?
Well, we never had this much gradation.
Yeah, I mean, what is that 3 acre?
What's it now?
It depends on the zone. That's the
Do
problem.
you have a range? Is 15 way less or way more than you would estimate now for that 3 acre property? Any idea?
Well, so thinking about one of those, that variance that was before us a couple months ago, tennis court in the back, long driveway, but it was what, a 10, 11 acre site?
Yeah, I think it was just over 10 acres.
Yeah. So with all that on, I think what they ended up at 9, is it 9%?
I don't remember the number.
I thought it was 7+.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm okay with
But
the
they were
7.5.
already at
The others
6
are-
based
Didn't we talk
upon,
about a scenario where we were gonna not include the major access
you could
to
try,
the buildings?
but
Didn't we talk about that?
We talked about that, Rich, but I think the general consensus was, let's be more simple.
Just increase.
everybody
Just increase
should
the
be able to
coverage.
read their ordinance.
Because if you've got a huge
get
piece of
number.
property and you've got a half a mile from the street to your property and it's 12 feet wide or whatever the heck it's gotta be, that's a big fraction.
Right, but when you crank it up from 5% to 7.5%, and you've got that big a lot, that
He's building that
just
in.
cascades
You
a lot of
build that in,
coverage.
okay.
And we're gonna exclude horse trotting areas or training areas.
Yeah, outdoor riding arenas.
I just mean I'm not talking even
No,
about
I
the
know.
circular drive, I'm just talking about.
I know, but when we went to the 7.5, that bumped up your
All
total
right,
coverage.
okay.
The only thing I would,
forgot how we handled that.
the thing that strikes me a little bit, Paul, is do we really need I don't know that we have a problem with insufficient or too low a coverage on these smaller, things between 2 acres and 10 acres. It's never seemed to be a big problem here.
Well, I think the idea was to create a reasonable number of gradations and not too many, because it gets, I don't think you want to have, okay, less than a half acre to 1 acre, 1 acre to 5 acres, 5 acres to 8 acres. I think it becomes too broad a range.
But what is 3 acres now? What is the lot
It
coverage?
depends on the zone.
It depends on the zone.
Different
So we have is it ever 15%?
It could be.
It could be, depending on the zone.
Okay, all right,
Maybe
so
even more.
it's comparable right now.
Yeah,
Okay, it's not some wacky number there.
yeah, these aren't all crazy numbers.
Okay.
Even though Frank came up with them, they're not all crazy.
Paul, what is,
Yeah, God will get you for that, Paul.
how much?
I'm not even there to defend myself. Come on, man.
Let's say by 10 guest cars. I'm just curious, I have no idea. I mean, because I understand.
2000, something like that, 2000.
Yeah.
But the driveway can be used for guest cars.
Well,
It's the grass on the side of the driveway.
Yeah, as long as everybody's stuck in there.
Well,
That is for the 10+ area. I mean, somebody with 3 to 5 acres probably wouldn't have that many.
I mean, look how big the coverage, look at how much coverage you can have for a 5 to 7 acre lot. I mean, that's a pretty big coverage.
That's a lot of
I
coverage.
would be okay with that column too. I don't know.
I'm fine with it.
Seems consistent.
I think these percentages at the lower edges are pretty big. 11,000 square.
Now, is this gonna depend at all
on a
on what
1 acre
zone we're
property.
in?
That's
Or-
25%.
No, that's the whole idea, Kathy, is that instead of the zone determining what coverage you get, the size of your lot, which is uniquely the appropriate measure, will become in any zone what determines your coverage.
Right now, each zone has a different percentage of lot coverage,
Yeah,
okay? And there is a section in the ordinance about non-conforming lots in the R10 zones or in other zones and how much they get. And that's where we started with this, is that shouldn't we just have one overall lot coverage based on the size of the lot? Recognizing that the different zones regulate the size of the lots. So you have zones that permit half-acre lots, zones that are 1 acre, those kinds of things. So those, that will happen there. You're not going to get a 10-acre lot in a zone that permits a half acre. It's not going to happen.
so but from the 3 to 5 lot area, you're proposing 13% coverage. What is it now?
It's only.
Again, it depends on the zone.
Well, in one of the 3 acre zones are like almost along 206. I mean,
No,
it's
it's
still
not,
close in.
it comes out to 17.9%.
No,
This is
what
the
Kathy's
delta.
asking is what the current zoning ordinance is.
This is the difference.
Yeah, what is the
Well,
current
the-
zone?
pick a zone, Paul. Well, you can have, and unfortunately, I don't have my ordinance in front of me, but in the R10 zone, there's a standard for non-conforming lots in the R10 zone. The R3 zone, I don't believe that that's a 3 acre lot. That's not what the zone standard is in the R3 zone. And I'm sorry, I just don't have those numbers off the top of my head. I can provide some of those comparisons, but what you have here are many more different layers of lot sizes.
And I absolutely agree with what you're talking about here, but I'm now thinking about some particular neighborhoods where there's larger lots in neighborhoods that could be in R1, or R2, but there's larger lots. Does that mean that they can then build a very large
Well,
house,
no,
which
but
would be
the-
inappropriate for the neighborhood?
Well, that's a good point, and that's what this does. If you're in a zone that permits a 1 acre lot, and you have
3
6 acres, you have 6 acres, 3 acres.
Ah, yeah, well, then
Okay.
you
Should
really,
be in the zone.
Yeah.
Under the current zone, you would get whatever permitted coverage you have on that 1 acre lot. If the 1 acre lot permits 20% coverage, you get 20% of 3 acres or 6 acres, or
Right.
whatever you have. If you use this, you would end up with, if you had 3 acres, 13.5% coverage, and not the same 20% coverage that would be the current standard for the 1 acre zone.
Your lot
So it
size-
dials it
your
down
lot
as the
size
lot gets
reduces
bigger.
your coverage percentage, but you still get a lot of coverage.
Right now, in the R3 district with a 3 acre minimum, which we do have there, if you have less than 3 acres, you get 15%. 3 to 5, you get 13.5. 5 to less than 10, you get 12%, and 10 acres and over, you get 10%. So that 10% is more than the 7.5 we're prepared to move
And
to.
that's twice what you get for a 10 acre lot in the R10 zone.
Yeah. Currently.
What do you mean? That's not.
I think the 10 acre plus is great. I'm concerned about some of our village neighborhoods where people own multiple, a lot more area.
Right, but this will address that.
This will help.
This helps that problem.
Okay.
Because under the current zoning, if you have a lot that's twice as big as the zone allows, then you still get that same percentage of the larger lot. This would dial down the percentage because your lot is bigger.
Okay.
Everyone who lives in a single-family home, go home tonight, pull up your survey and see how this works.
Well, that's the other.
I mean, essentially, this is what Colin and I were just discussing with respect to our homes and to see how we fit and does that seem appropriate?
Yeah.
And you know what? I can do a random sample of some lots and come up with what it looks like in some
That'd
different
be great.
zones.
I think that.
You don't
I gotta
seem to
say,
be having
my
a problem.
House in particular, because there's a lot of houses in our neighborhood, and I have the largest lot on that street. I have no intention of putting anything else on it. But if somebody else buys this house, does that mean that they can build a lot more onto that lot? Because it's the largest one in the neighborhood? You don't want it to,
Right, but
mess
you
up
have a
the
different
neighborhood.
zone. Your zone is different than the same size, your lot coverage is different than the same size lot in the R10 zone,
Right,
because you're in the R2 zone.
right.
Under this standard, if you had a 4-acre lot in your zone, or you had a 4-acre lot in the R10 zone, you get the same coverage.
And you get less than you get currently.
It dials it down.
Okay.
Because your lot size is not gonna increase.
Instead of it being an even line going up, it has breaks that level it out.
Okay, I trust.
The other thing is that oversized house that would be permitted on a large lot in another zone that would otherwise have smaller lots, all of a sudden becomes completely out of place, even though maybe the lot doesn't look that big. It permits 2 or 3 times as much house and coverage, and so I think it's careful. We're being careful here. I like what Paul came up with. I think it's fixable.
Frank, to follow up on that issue, a couple of years ago, we did amend some of the lot coverage in certain neighborhoods. And what I'm thinking about is in Collins neighborhood,
SFC.
right? You have very nice homes, but folks could not put in pools. And
patios.
or patios,
Exactly.
and people were and I dealt with this as mayor. We can't put a pool in. We can buy the same house in Bernardsville or Tewksbury for comparable money or maybe even less, and it has a pool. So if we're looking to put a pool or do the patio improvements, your existing zone requires us to come and get a variance.
And that's, part of that is related to the way that development was built.
Right,
It was built by a builder who maximized the lot coverage for the homes that he sold.
Developers do that?
Shockingly, yeah, sometimes. And so they built it out to the maximum coverage, because anything after that didn't matter to them.
Right. No, I understand, but here we are with, that is our building stock.
Right, and the point is, if they had been allowed greater coverage back then, the houses would have been bigger, and you'd still have the same.
Right.
Yeah.
That's true too. You may not get a pool, you may get an addition.
Yeah, and
But 30%, if that's what the zone it is, that's a very generous coverage. I mean, that, for a single family neighborhood, 30% is
Huge, it's a huge house.
All I will tell you.
I mean, I'm not saying that it shouldn't be changed. I'm just saying that's in the scheme of normal zoning, that's a high coverage.
but you just put it into perspective of putting in the paver patio, the brick
I know,
patio.
and that's why I say really count everything you
The
did.
driveway takes up a ton of space right there.
And everybody adds to their driveway to the left or right of their driveway.
Correct.
And the smaller lots have shorter driveways.
Right.
It's another aspect.
Right.
Yeah, we were just discussing that my little half circle driveway only goes into the property that much, as opposed to some of the other driveways where, the garage is in the back and you got to get all the way back there.
I think you should get credit because it's not impervious.
Nothing in Bedminster is pervious.
Yeah, I was gonna
All
say,
of Bedminster
the land is
impervious.
not pervious.
So, and I do come back to a comment similar to what Kathy and I think Lou were just discussing, and this comment that Steve Parker made. Years ago, there was this anti-McMansion sentiment, and even here in Bedminster, and bring the lot coverage down, and it was impacting some of the larger properties on 10 acres and plus. and Steve and I were having this conversation, at that point, you're not talking about McMansions. You're talking about mansions.
Right.
And if you have 10 plus acres,
Who cares?
you should be able to build
Right.
yourself.
And
the
Larry,
mansion.
that was the FAR issue we had with counting the basements.
Right.
That was the biggest,
Yeah.
And that was
Problem.
certainly a big part.
and that got fixed.
Right. So, I mean, we ended up fixing both issues. I think this does bring some sensibility to it. And Kathy, I do think that your concern is addressed by that, because I think it actually
Great.
tailors it.
That's good.
But I think it would be good to see some examples.
I remember that issue with the house,
We had it a couple of times.
that's actually on the
Elizabeth
Moreland
Lane?
Farms property, that was on the back of Moreland's Farms there by where
Hamilton
the
Farms.
Suttons live. What street is that? Field Drive or something
Yeah.
like that,
Yeah.
right? The guy built the mansion there.
Oh, right.
And he came in with a full basement, and the reason why he was going over is because he had a full basement. It's like, well, if you made a half a basement, and the rest of it was like crawl space, or,
We've had a number of those
he
applications.
could have built the same darn house.
Right.
So we fixed that.
So for the next meeting, just some examples?
Well, I want to adjust column
Right.
2, so the last column looks like column 2. And then I'll give you some examples.
Are we gonna throw anybody into non-compliance if we suddenly recalculate this?
Probably, because they're pre-existing non-conforming condition.
But then if they want to do an addition, or they want to do patio,
Patio, that's what-
pool,
right,
or,
right.
Yeah, well, they may have a problem now.
right.
Yeah.
I can guarantee you somebody will need a
Somebody will,
variance.
somebody's gonna call.
It's a
But
pre-existing
somebody already
non-conforming
is,
use.
right? Like, but there's already gonna be some pre-existing
yeah, yeah.
non-conforming that can't do the thing
Some-
they want. and
Some
so-
towns actually interpret the pool as not being impervious because there's 6
Because it's filled with water already.
There's there's
Right,
6
but
inches
how
of
much of that
freeboard.
water
Yeah, we got 6
permeates into
inches
the
of
ground?
freeboard.
6 inches of freeboard, and therefore it
No,
takes the rain.
And I've
But they're
fought this
also
argument
pumping it
for
out.
many, many years. It's impervious. What happens with the water that comes down and falls on?
It evaporates.
It doesn't go into the ground. That's where it goes today.
It evaporates.
It could be considered a retention tank.
No.
Retention tank. Depending on how big the pool is, you get 6 inches of retention.
Yeah, but that's not the point. The point is groundwater recharge.
Oh, okay. You got me.
Another-
You got me.
Give up.
And it's green space, not blue space.
All right. Is there anything else that, Frank, do you have anything else you want to discuss with us regarding this?
Or other master plan things.
Any other master plan?
No, I think the
Comments
master
or
plan
just
items.
master plan issues?
I do need a closed session, a short one, but not.
Right, but before we do that, we also have, hold some pending applications on here.
Yeah.
Update us on that.
Yeah, that's the
That's just being carried.
Alfieri that's going on indefinitely. And like Janine said, we just got another one in today. I saw it.
He's waiting for interest rates to come down.
Like everybody else.
I don't want to talk about the application because it's not appropriate, but I have to wonder, the longer we extend any application as we get closer to the middle of July of 2025, where we'll have a new affordable housing obligation, it would be unfortunate that somebody had positioned themselves with a series of buildings that could be turned into some inclusionary development project without us intending that. So I don't know how long we continue applications without, but I mean, they put the application together, they have a right to be continued and considered. And Tom, I guess your opinion is more important than mine is when it comes to that.
Yeah, Frank, I'll think about it. Let's not talk about it tonight.
All right, so we're gonna move over to board member comments before we close it up. Maybe we'll just comment about. Seeing none.
I just have one thing that I think you all should be aware of. We're on the verge of withdrawing an application in Bridgewater. And Wendy touched on it a little bit about, how these applications cost money. My company probably spent $750,000 on an application in Bridgewater, only to withdraw it. That's land use attorneys, site civil engineers, and the drill that Bridgewater put us through was that we couldn't even work with their professionals to develop a solution that the professionals could support or recommend. Everything had to be done through the course of the hearings. Changes that were recommended, response to the letters had to be done verbatim in the meetings, dragging the meetings out, a process that I started with their planner probably in 2021. And $750,000 later, for numerous reasons, not the least of which is an increase of 550 basis points since we started the exercise till now. But I think being sensitive to the cost of these development exercises, these applications, is something that we can't lose sight of.
I was going to make a comment when we discussed some of the signs to ask if there was a way we could streamline from a cost perspective some of those applications, which are, may not require as many. I'm not familiar with what the applications require, but to the extent there's an ability to streamline some of the applications or maybe divide them in, sort of class 1 and class 2 kind of thing, maybe we can make some of the use more friendly.
I think the issue, Steve, is that we can't change the fact that they have to come to the board if they need a variance. I will tell you that one thing that we routinely do, and when people come to see me all the time, like this Brooks application, what can we get waivers for? I say, ask for all these waivers because you're going to get them because you don't need to do it.
Waivers for completeness.
I do that with almost every application that comes in that sees me ahead of time. And, because I have a feel for what the board's going to think is important and what you really don't want to be concerned about. Then you could always ask for it later if you wanted to, even if he'd give a waiver for it, for completeness. But, if they have to come to this board, the cash register starts churning. And like I said before, if it's not an individual person.
Right, I'm aware of that.
And the only thing we can do is change the ordinance.
Yeah.
Right, which is why we're talking about, like, what the process is, where people are getting stuck in the process, where they're spending money, maybe before they get here, right? And one of the examples Wendy just mentioned tonight, and we talked a lot about, is something that HPC was never gonna approve. The likelihood that the land use board, given the site and the current state, was likely not gonna approve. So does Wendy make them, and the Historic Preservation Committee, make this applicant go get professional sign renderings and come to 2 or 3 meetings to work on a sign that really doesn't have a lot of likelihood of getting anywhere? Or does she punt it to us, conditional, and let them, right? So how do we streamline that process a little?
Maybe the process has to be that the zoning officer has to get the sign application first.
And that's the way it is.
What we decided, yeah.
I mean,
That is the
and that they don't look at any sign that doesn't have zoning imprimatur, whether it's needed from this board or whether it's needed.
Right, but typically that's not how it happens. Typically, when we get when the land use board, whether Board of Adjustment or zoning, gets an application, Historic Preservation Commission appropriateness is a condition for them to come to us.
It's a completeness
It's a
item.
completeness.
Well,
And if we
but that's the case where the zoning officer has first determined that, so it's still going first to the zoning officer.
Yep.
And the zoning officer gives a red light and said, or agree, if the zoning officer gives a green light, then it's just a matter of going and getting the Historic Commission approval.
So if it doesn't need a variance.
If it doesn't need a variance.
Yep.
And I want to talk about something that Tom mentioned before, when you talk about streamlining, because you must keep this in mind. You double the sizes that are permitted in the VN zone, every one of those properties is going to want a larger sign. And the question I have for you is, if you have a sign application that complies with the sign ordinance, do they need a site plan approval? If they do, you have jacked the cost through the ceiling. and I have to look in the ordinance, we came up with a whole series of types of applications that did not require, that were site plan exemptions. And I have to look to see if a conforming sign was one of those. But it'd be my strong recommendation that if somebody complies with the sign ordinance in every
And that's the
aspect,
only thing that
they should
changes.
not have to come here.
No, I agree.
You know, because just look at the checklist for a site plan. And you've got the attorneys, you've got the engineers, and you've got the planners, it just goes to the roof.
But you're a very reasonable board and a very reasonable township, so don't worry so much. That's my view of it, and Paul's very reasonable, so.
Frank's on mute, that's a good thing.
Anybody have any additional comments? Okay, if that's the case, I guess we can close the public open
Yeah.
portion of the meeting.
I do want to have a short litigation discussion with you. It's,
Wait,
uh,
we need to
Stop.
He's
Turn-
gonna do the
stop the
motion
recording.
first, and then we gotta.
go into close and
Attorney
turn off.
Lizzie, attorney.
Uh-oh.
Oh, boy.
I agree with Larry about his view. So it's a motion on a resolution to go into closed or executive session pursuant to section 7 and 8 of the Open Public Meetings Act to discuss matters of pending litigation, attorney-client privilege communication, the matters to be revealed to the public upon the completion of all litigation and appeals. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
So moved. Second.
All in
Can I
favor?
have a first, please?
Down there's.
Steve.
That was Steve.
Yeah.
Second?
Second by Rich.
Thank you.
All in favor?
Time, and no recording is necessary, but we need Frank, I guess.
Stephen has the floor?
We have come out of
Motion to
the
adjourn.
executive session, so that's all on our agenda tonight. So
All
is
right.
there a motion to adjourn?
Stephen made it, I'll second.
Are we having a meeting next week? Do you
Oh.
have any applicants?
Yes, are we having a meeting? We need a meeting next
Good,
week.
I have a conflict anyway.
You're not here. You have your OEM training.
Yeah, I have OEM training.
I don't need a
You
meeting.
have an anniversary?
Anniversary?
Oh, wait, no, I have a birthday. My wife's birthday. Right?
Well, you can't come.
Well, she could come here, she could come here yet.
We not have a.
Actually, Paul told her he has a meeting he has to
We
go to.
have a meeting next week, then, correct?
Yes, and as soon as I know which meeting, the other applicant wants in June, I will let you guys know.
Okay, I will be remote if it's the second meeting. All right, okay.
Motion.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, Carol.
Thank you.
Have a nice weekend, everybody.
Yeah, good night.
Thank you.
Although I need some free physical therapy advice.